My name is Kelly Caulfield. I'm the executive director of the Common Sense Institute. Excited to see a lot of new faces today and some new old faces, but all good faces on St. Patrick's Day. Thanks for joining us bright and early. For those who don't know, the Common Sense Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to the Colorado economy. We believe that economic research is essential to uphold our economy, the vitality, the future, and individual opportunity. Before we get into today's program, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Our board of directors, we are so grateful to the Colorado Board of Directors. If you are here today for the Colorado Board or the National Board, would you please stand so that we can give you a round of applause? Our work would not be possible without our set of bipartisan policy fellows. So I wanted to take a moment to show you them. I think we do have a few here today. If you could stand or raise your hand. I know I saw Greg Walcher today wearing a good purple color. Greg, thank you for being here. This work would not be possible without a set of bipartisan policy fellows who really tackle the hard issues. I also want the research team to raise your hand real quick and be acknowledged. The Common Sense research team, they are in the back. Please raise your hand so that people know who you are. They are the ones who work behind the scenes and get all this great work done. Today, we are mainly going to focus on our 6th annual Free Enterprise Report, which shows Colorado's competitiveness relative to every other state and the District of Columbia. It contains what we call our Dr. Byers Free Enterprise Competitiveness Index, and I think we are all very eager for those results. But before we focus on that report, and I'll invite our economist to brief you all, I did want to share another report that we are issuing in just a few hours. So you all are the first to hear about this. And it's on a very important and related topic, and that's affordability in Colorado. The report's called The Inflation Hangover, and it's focusing on how the post-pandemic price surges really reshaped affordability all across our country and in Colorado. We found that inflation has declined, thankfully, but affordability issues remain. And we were curious, how does Colorado stack up to every other state? And there's a few different ways to skin a cat. There's a few different methodologies out there. But for our economists, we found that Colorado is the 9th least affordable state in the country. And the way that we looked at this was we looked at what are some of the core services, the core needs that individuals need, that households need in our state. And we aggregated that to show a full cost of it costs $20,000 more than it did just in 2019 to afford basic services. So you can see up here on the slide, we were able to show that people are spending $7,500 more on housing and utilities than we did just a few years ago, $1,400 more in car insurance. I really feel that one, and I have an old car. $2,800 more for groceries, $1,200 more for health insurance. That's really been, I think, acutely felt. And then $7,900 more for childcare. So when you aggregate all of these expenses together, we're spending $20,000 more per year than we did just in 2019. In other words, wages are not keeping up with expenses. Our estimated household income in Colorado rose by 36%. But these other increases are going at a much more rapid rate, as you can see. And we highlighted these 3 because I just think I was pretty shocked, actually, when I saw those high percentage increases, especially for car insurance. And I'd have to suspect some of our auto theft and other auto-related crimes are a part of that increased rate. Childcare, which has been very well documented by our CORE's Economic Mobility Fellow, Tamra Ryan, that has increased by 56%, and housing costs plus utilities have increased by 40%. And while our state is getting less affordable, we are unfortunately also becoming less competitive. So I am going to invite one of CSI's economists to the stage, and I want to introduce him briefly, and he will go through the results of our free enterprise report. You have cheat sheets on your table, so that's our one pager, but the entire report is available on our website. Zach is our senior economist and research analyst at the Common Sense Institute. Prior to joining us at the Common Sense Institute, he attended Arizona State University, where he attained a bachelor's degree in economics and statistics, followed by a master's degree in economics. Zach has also worked for the Arizona Governor's Budget Office, where he served as a chief economist, and he's also served our country in the United States Air Force. Zach, thank you so much for being here, and please come up to the podium.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Before I kind of hop into the summary of the Free Enterprise Report and Colorado's kind of rankings in that report, I kind of want to set the stage of what I see for the state here and kind of what we've captured in our report. So, I think by a lot of metrics, the economy in Colorado is strong. Colorado is a competitive state. I think when you look at things like GDP per capita and income, the state ranks very highly, and that's due in large part to a pretty long period of sustained economic growth that we saw, really, I think, going back to the 2010s. But that growth was not by accident. I think largely the state years ago, and maybe to some extent today, but especially years ago, was seen as a model for pro-growth policy. And that led to that economic expansion that we saw. But I think today, we risk sort of taking that growth for granted. I don't think we can take that growth as inevitable. And so, really to me, I see Colorado at sort of an inflection point. Do we continue to foster the policies and the things that got us to where we are today in terms of our economy and our competitiveness? Or are we going to take a different policy route and maybe erode some of those advantages that we've seen in our economy? And so with that, I think that's helpful to kind of set the stage for the state as I kind of go through the Free Enterprise Report here. So this slide here shows the Free Enterprise Competitiveness Index and the rank for the state. Pay attention really to the red line there that shows the state's competitiveness ranking compared to all other states and Washington, D.C. And one thing you'll notice is that Colorado ranks pretty highly. It ranks 17th, I believe, in 2024, which is the latest data in our report. So it's doing very well. But another thing you'll also notice is that the state's done well since pretty much we started capturing this data. But if you go back to 2011, the state was ranked even higher. 2011 and 2013, the state was ranked in the top 10. And you've seen this kind of consistent downward trajectory in the ranking through that time. So although the state still ranks very highly, there's been kind of this trend that we don't want to see. We want to see it to continue to rank highly, but it's been trending downward. So what are some of the explanations for our relative strength today, but also kind of the decline in our competitiveness that we see in the report? And so the three strengths that kind of stand out to me, I think, are our workforce, education, and healthcare. And I'm going to jump into the first two in a little bit more detail. And then the three weaknesses and three challenges I see for the state. Unsurprisingly, housing is a big one, public safety and crime, and then state and local budgets. So first, let's start with the strengths. So workforce. The Colorado economy is a very high-tech, tech-centered economy, and you don't get that without having a very skilled, very productive, and very educated workforce. And so when we look at measures of, for instance, labor productivity here in the state ranks very well compared to the rest of the nation. When you try and gauge measures of how educated or how prolific, a high school education is, in the state ranks very highly in that as well. So a very large share of the population, 25 and older, has a high school degree compared to other states. And then we have relatively low union representation here in Colorado, which has helped kind of businesses be nimble. It's helped investment flow into the state over the years. And then I think education is another strong point as well. If you look at 4th and 8th grade, what we call NAEP score, so that's National Assessment of Education Proficiency. I'm proud of myself that I got that. I'm not properly caffeinated this morning, so I was worried I was going to forget that. But if you look at NAEP scores, the state's doing really well in 4th and 8th grade math and reading. And then the state also has a very robust school choice environment. Charter schools account for roughly 15% of public school enrollment here in the state. So we rank that, very highly relative to other states as well. Let's talk about some of the weaknesses. So obviously, housing, rent prices have skyrocketed in recent years. When you look at measures that try and gauge the housing shortage here in the state, Colorado actually has the second highest housing shortage of all states that we measure in the report. Public safety is also a big one. Higher crime rates, and we've done a lot of research here at CSI on crime, and I think like the fentanyl crisis and those other things, and I think Colorado in particular has been acutely affected by those things. Even though crime's been going down really across the board, I think it's still an issue that we have to contend with here in Colorado. Rising drug overdose deaths is a big one. And then if you look at measures, and part of this is due to the rise in crime, but if you look at measures of like police availability and measure it relative to reported crime rates, so like police per crime, for instance, you see a pretty marked decline here in Colorado. So just to give you an example, Colorado ranked 18th in 2011 in terms of sworn police officers per reported crimes, and it ranked 47th in 2024. So pretty stark decline in that measure. And then state and local budgets. When you look at state and local debt service costs, they're particularly high compared to a lot of other states in the nation. And then a big one, and I think we've highlighted this a lot in our monthly jobs reports here in Colorado, but government employment in the public sector has been growing pretty strong, and I think much stronger than what you see in the private sector. So we worry that there's sort of a bit of this crowding out, if you will, in the employment sector with the public sector growing so fast versus the private sector. Some other trends I wanted to point out. Colorado ranks well in infrastructure and energy. I think infrastructure in particular, thanks to really strong broadband internet access across the state, which is very important in the sort of 21st century economy that we have. But we do see kind of falling rankings in road and bridge conditions, which suggests that we're not quite upkeeping with the infrastructure like in some other states. And then energy in particular, the state ranks well today, but I do see some kind of what I'll call like flashing red lights as it relates to energy. So grid reliability has been on the decline. And interestingly, when you look at some of the metrics for energy in Colorado, for instance, 43% of Colorado's energy comes from renewables. I believe this is 7th in the U.S. And really since 2015, we've seen a 10-fold increase in solar power generation. It's not a coincidence, I think, that when you look at Colorado's ranking in energy competitiveness in our report, you see right around 2015 is when that ranking starts to decline. And so I think this overemphasis on green energy, while that may be a worthwhile policy, if you go too strong in that direction, we risk sort of grid reliability. And that's certainly what we've seen in the data. Okay, so what does all this mean for Colorado? You say, well, Zach, Colorado's economy, we look at a lot of these measures. You said at the beginning of your talk here that the state is still strong. That's true, but I think there are some causes for concern here. So to me, what I have circled here, this is net interstate migration and the state's ranking across the nation here. And you see the state was ranked near the top at the beginning of the chart. and has since sort of fallen off a cliff. And to me, this is that very bright, blinking red light that signals, hey, something has changed. Colorado was once a desirable state. Everyone wanted to move here. Businesses were coming, investment was coming, people were coming. Not so much anymore. And I think even though we may look at measures of economic, prosperity, GDP per capita, and incomes, those may still be high. I think these are the kind of first domino to fall, in a sense, as we start to maybe lose that momentum and start to lose our economic growth. So just to sum up, I think Colorado's performance today is really in part due, or in large part due to that past momentum that we've had. It's carrying us forward today, even though we may be enacting some policies that are detrimental to that growth. That momentum's still going to carry us forward a little bit. But that momentum is declining. And I don't think we can take that stuff for granted. The established tech industry here will help keep the economy strong, keep it growing into the future. But again, we can't take that for granted. Policy matters. And to the extent that we enact policies that are detrimental to that growth, that's going to play out. Although even though the results may be lagged, I think it's going to play out here. So the lesson is really, policies may not have this instant effect. We may not have the instant gratification of policy, but it will come to bear eventually. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and make sure we are preparing ourselves and setting the economy up for success. And that's all I have for you with that. I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly.
Thank you so much, Zach. Really interesting results. And we're now going to have a panel conversation to really unpack all of this. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for the future of our state? And I don't think we could have a better panel to really talk about this. What we've tried to do today is recreate a phenomenal program that's been going on since 2018 on CBS called Left, Right, and Center. And that airs during election years as you get closer to the election. I don't think it's started yet for this year, so we're jump-starting it now and just thrilled to have this panel. While I introduce you all, can you please make your way to the stage? Today we have Shaun Boyd serving as a moderator. We're really thrilled that Shaun was able to be with us today. She is a veteran political reporter who began at CBS News Colorado in 1998. She has since covered 6 national political conventions with live analysis and was among the first nationally in the whole country, not just Colorado, to fact check political ads through her reality check segments, which I always really enjoy. Thank you, Shaun, for being here today. We also have Mike Dino here. He is a Colorado-based political strategist and very well-known public affairs professional. He's advised numerous candidates and organizations at the state and local levels, shaping campaign strategy, messaging, and voter outreach. Thanks so much for being here, Mike. And finally, Dick Wadhams is a longtime Colorado political strategist and commentator who has managed multiple major campaigns at the state and national level, including Majority Leader John Thune's 2004 election campaign. I'm now going to turn it over to Shaun, and thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause for being here today.
Is my mic on? Yes. All right. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for inviting us. This is fun to get the gang back together.
Yeah, we're back on the stage.
I know, right. I want to start with this competitiveness ranking. And, we heard how we slipped in recent years, according to the Common Sense Institute's reports. What specific policy decisions or economic trends do you believe are most responsible for this? Mike, you want to start?
Sure. Well, one, I do think other states have been more competitive. I think that in Colorado, I'm a native. I grew up in Northwest Denver, so I have that bias. I remember, and I was talking to Don Childers, my parents were in the banking industry, and the worst it was ever in Colorado was the late 80s. The energy industry just completely collapsed. And Colorado was terrible. My dad was a commercial loan officer and loan executive. And it was, I mean, he was closing restaurants left and right, other businesses, liquidating them, taking them into receivership. And, you know, I was I just finished getting an MBA, or getting an MBA up at CU. And, it just seemed like the worst time ever in Colorado. And so I always kind of harken back to that I don't think it ever was that bad again. And that's great. But I do think other states are more competitive. And I think they find ways to invest in important things. Now, we're not going to host the World Cup soccer this year. And one of the reasons is because we just got outbid by Missouri and Kansas. They put over $100 million into their bid, and we were at about half of that. And they wanted, FIFA wanted to be here. They wanted to be in Colorado. They wanted to be in Denver. But we weren't going to put money out, particularly from our governments. The money I mentioned that Missouri and Kansas put in, that was from the state. And the city of Kansas City put in $15 million alone. And so I do think that when you look at where we are, sometimes other states just outbid us.
Is that because of our budget constraints?
Well, I think it's part of our budget constraints, and I also think it's where, we decide to put our money. And we've never put public funding into events like that.
Dick, you want to jump in here? I ask what specific policy decisions or economic trends are responsible. Do you believe that is the issue, though? Is it policy decisions that have led us to this?
It is, and I think we've seen that. John Caldera from the Independence Institute has a program called Devil's Advocate, and he had a 45-minute conversation with Kent Thiry, the retired president and CEO of DaVita. And he moved that company to Colorado 16 years ago. And John asked him a very fundamental question, Shaun, that goes into the heart of this. He said, Kent, if the Colorado of today had existed back in 2009, would you have moved DaVita and all those jobs and all that presence in Colorado to this state? Would you have moved it? And Kent did not answer yes. He said, I don't know. Now think about that. Think about and extrapolate that further. How many companies right now are saying to themselves, well, we thought we might want to move to Colorado, but we're not going to now? How many people are saying to themselves, how many companies are leaving Colorado? Palantir just left. You look at this, and that tells the story right there, Shaun, that the regulatory and tax environment in Colorado has basically caused where we are today. There's an interesting, the most important question on any poll I've ever dealt with running campaigns is Colorado, or whatever the entity is, on the right track or wrong track? For the first time in the last 10 years, 15 years, you look at any poll in Colorado, and Colorado is on the wrong track by a majority of voters right now. That is significant. And that is a testimony, frankly, to the governing body of Colorado right now, and their regulatory and tax environments that they've imposed on this state.
So I look at some of these indexes that we've got, the education, the obviously housing, public safety, energy, and we've long struggled with the high housing prices and even the high crime rate relative to other states, even though our crime rate has come down significantly. Government does seem to be reactionary a lot of times,
Yes.
crisis mode. But Colorado was once seen as a model for balancing business growth with quality of life. At what point did the balance tip? And were there warning signs that policymakers should have seen and missed?
I think you can trace it back, Shaun, to the start of this decline to 2018, because I think that's when you get this total control of state government by one party. And by the way, I am not trying to make this in a partisan discussion today.
But you can do.
Yeah, there are many very thoughtful Democrats. In fact, I think back to to the governorship of Roy Romer, who had 12 years and he was a great governor. I think Bill Ritter had some great years. But in 2018, when this state went totally to one-party control at every level, in every conceivable way, that's when you saw the overregulation, the undermining of Tabor, and also crime. George Brockler wrote a fantastic column for the Denver Gazette a few weeks ago, where he laid out in detail every piece of legislation that has basically favored criminals over victims and put criminals back on the street. I commend that piece to you, because it is a boilerplate for what has gone wrong on the crime front. So I think that's when it started, Shaun, and I think it's shown in terms of the results of actions by this legislature and other governors.
I know, just on the crime point, I don't want to belabor that, but there is talk of building a new prison in Colorado. I don't know where that money even comes from, $1 billion to build a new prison, or even to, we've got some of these facilities that have closed and opening one of them. Mm-hmm. So, when we talk about this crime, there's got to be a balance there too. Yes. But Mike, what do you think in terms of where did we go wrong, I guess?
Well,
and did policymakers miss that? Did it sneak up on them? Should they have seen this coming?
I'm not sure there's an imbalance. I mean, Coloradans have always struggled with, there's too many people in this state. We wish some folks would leave. There's not enough people. I don't think we're ever happy exactly where we are. And I think that, we've seen an out-migration of folks. Of course, even the United States has seen an out-migration of Americans moving to other countries. The Wall Street Journal had a recent article about how that's become very significant. And so I think that in Colorado, we're always trying to find a balance. I do think people are very thoughtful of that. I think the business community is an outstanding advocate of making sure that things don't swing too far one way. We see the Labor Peace Act legislation appearing in the state legislature again this year. Last year it was vetoed by the governor. Again, it's going to be taken on. We see that AI legislation. Colorado was kind of ahead of things 2 years ago when we passed some legislation. You can argue, should the governor have signed that? But nonetheless, the legislature took that on. AI has raced way ahead of that legislation. So it'll be interesting in how they address it before the deadline this year at the end of June. That will put a lot of pretty significant regulations on AI. I do think they will find a balance. And so, I don't think Shaun, we've gotten to a place where there's a terrible imbalance. But I do think that people are always worried that we're going to get out of balance, and there's a lot of advocates to make sure that doesn't happen.
In terms of AI,
mm-hmm.
I think the task force is doing a vote today, and I was told that they're about 90% there to coming up with some agreement.
But they've been 90% there on AI last year, and that 10% is hard to figure out.
Yeah. When you talk about balance, I think energy is one of those areas that some would argue we may be out of balance. Climate change, obviously real and important to address, but we also have this growing need for electricity. We've got two bills, I know you're aware of them, down at the legislature. One would incentivize data centers to come here. The other would say, well, if you come here, you're going to have to offset all that electricity you use with renewables. So disincentivize, really, them to come here. Do you think we have balance in terms of energy right now?
Well, I mean, I think we've worked hard to increase the renewable energy part of our system. I think that in the environment from Washington is changing the way we got to look at it, and we haven't talked about that. I think Colorado's competitiveness has been impacted by tariffs, has been impacted by immigration policy, has been impacted by just the politics of Washington and the way that Washington has really tried to, penalize certain states for certain things. And so I think we're impacted by that. But in terms of energy, I think we've benefited by being on the forefront of renewables. It has helped us diversify what we do in terms of our communities, allowing homes. I mean, I have solar on my house, and that's made a big difference. And I think that I think we should continue to move down that path. But the bottom line is that we're still going to need fossil fuels, now and into the future. And I agree that we need to do all we can to make sure that the fossil fuel industry is not decimated, as some of our folks feel that the Democratic side would want to do.
And coal?
Coal, I'm not a big fan of coal. I just can't get there. But natural gas, I think, has a lot of promise.
Mike talked about the solar panels on his house, Dick.
I don't have solar panels.
I did a story you probably saw, you're a loyal viewer, with Representative Crank.
Yes.
On some legislation he's got addressing energy mandates when it comes to building homes.
Right.
And he feels like they've really driven up the cost.
Yes.
Things like you've got to now in Colorado, if you put in a gas appliance, you've got to also put in an electric receptacle.
Right.
You've got to wire for EV in your garage, even if your homeowner says, I don't want an EV, I'm never going to get an EV. You have to make sure that the roof can support solar panels, even if you don't put them on, and have it wired. So those all add costs, right, to our housing. I'm sure I know the answer to this, but feel like we maybe are out of balance.
Totally out of balance, Shaun. I mean, when I hear people talk about affordability and bemoan the fact that people cannot buy homes, well, guess why? Because of this regulatory environment that imposes those requirements on builders and that prices people out of being able to buy a home. On energy, we've gone way too far to try to destroy the oil and gas industry. The coal industry is destroyed, essentially. And what's interesting to me about the coal thing, and listen, coal is being phased out, but I think we did it much too quickly. And we did it without any consideration at all for those communities in northwestern Colorado and throughout the western slope. You will never be able to replace those coal jobs on the western slope. Those guys were making, in total with salary and benefits, probably $100,000 a year. When they leave, those jobs are not going to be replicated, despite the fact that the legislature established, the Just Transition Office, sounds something out of Soviet Union, frankly. But those communities are going to be decimated. School districts are not going to get the support of those property taxes by those coal companies and those coal operations. And yet, very little consideration is given, I think, by the people who want to kill coal. But all of a sudden, the grid is a problem, and now Comanche 3 in Pueblo and the Nixon Power Plant in Colorado Springs, they want to extend their life. Xcel knows that there's going to be a grid problem, and so they want to extend the life of those coal operations, and which I think is very fascinating, and I think that might continue. But oil and gas, Secretary Wright from the Trump administration was in Colorado last week with Congressman Gabe Evans talking about the oil and gas industry. And there was, once again, the jobs that frankly, the anti-energy, anti-fossil fuels people want to kill. If they could kill those jobs, they would. And it's making Colorado less competitive and less a good place to live. So the decline of Colorado is easily identified when you add up all these things. Mike alluded to the Labor Peace Act. Can you imagine what, on that one slide that we had, talking about that Colorado has a good labor environment right now? It's going to be destroyed if they succeed in repealing the Colorado Labor Peace Act. And so just on and on and on. It just doesn't end what this legislature and this state government is trying to do to make Colorado uncompetitive.
I think we are the only ones that have the 2 votes.
Yeah, we do. And I, being on the Democratic side, I mean, I've worked with labor, and I see Kelly Brough out there. And, Kelly, when she worked certainly for Mayor Hickenlooper, had a lot of interaction with labor, and many of you probably have. I mean, I just don't feel labor. I mean, I remember the heydays of labor when I first got in the political world. I'm 62 years old. I started when I ran for the Board of Regents when I was 24. And that's when labor was in its heyday. And Miller, you know a lot of this. And the big labor leader guys and they were mostly men who ran it, had a lot of power. I don't see that anymore. Sure, we see collective bargaining, is going to take effect in the city of Denver. And we see it in some other communities, but they have, and I don't think they'll ever get back to those days when they really wielded a lot more influence on the political process, on the business process, and on what was happening in industry. And I think I'm not sure. I think the Labor Peace Act has been good. I don't think it's the end of the world if it changes.
This is kind of a broad question here. What do you think would be the single biggest policy change that would reverse this trajectory that we seem to be on? And what realistically would it take to pass that?
It's more of killing some things, Shaun, in my opinion. It's killing this things that they want to put on the ballot to kill Tabor. That has got to be defeated. If they get that on the ballot, and they're going to get it on the ballot, because that will further undermine the Tabor law. It will further undermine the difficulty of the budget.
How so?
If you sink $4 billion, what is it, $2 billion or whatever it is into education, it allows the rest of the budget to continue to grow without it should be restrained. And so it does undermine Tabor, and it undermines the ability of state government. I mean, Barbara Kirkmeyer was talking about this morning on KOA about that very thing. When it really gets down to it, Shaun, it's stopping this madness that's coming out of this legislature that we are now paying the price for. And Mike, I understand what you're saying about the heyday of labor, and I have a great sympathy for labor. I have a brother who's a union welder in Pueblo, so I have sympathy for that. But I will tell you that they wouldn't be pushing that if they didn't think they could force businesses to be more unionized. Why would they be picking this fight? So to me, it's stopping that crazy Tabor vote on education. It's getting rid of these regulations. It's just pulling back this regulatory and tax environment that we've seen destroy this state over the last 8 years.
Mike, you got any policy that you think would help?
I think, and it was touched upon in the report, workforce development. And I think a lot of you in the business world, I mean, why people are attracted to Colorado is because we have a quality workforce. And we cannot underestimate how much we need to continue to invest in not only our tech-related jobs, but the service industry. The Wall Street Journal had an article today that for the first time ever, for commercial real estate, the percentage is tipped in the majority for retail, for services, and not for goods. It used to be that goods dominated retail, commercial real estate, and now it is services. And so people and their ability to provide the talent and the necessary education in our workforce has always been a big factor. And we can't, I think we can't invest enough in that. And there's always been a question, are we putting enough into higher education, community colleges, into certainly non-higher education training that certainly I think would help folks who don't seek a college degree. And so that, to me, is where we can continue to be most competitive.
I mentioned how government oftentimes reactionary, waits till the crisis hits. Workforce is one of the strengths that Zach talked about, and yet Colorado has either one of or the fastest growing aging populations.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And then we also we have childcare expenses that have grown 54%, I think you said. in just the last few years, which, doesn't bode well if you're trying to attract young workers here who want to start a family or have a family, right? So does more need to be done? Just sort of maybe looking ahead, seeing this on the horizon. We're going to have a problem here if we have this aging population and we're not able to draw the younger workers in.
Well, I mean, I think there's some good things. I mean, certainly there's been reports that show that Gen X and millennials do like Colorado and do like the Denver metro area. I do think childcare is a big issue when we look south to New Mexico to see how that's going to work out. I mean, they basically passed or have committed statewide to a program for providing childcare for everybody, and that would be a big leap for Colorado. Businesses, I think, would be leery of it because of the cost, but certainly families and workers would appreciate that. So we ought to see what we can learn from our neighbor. I know, Rick, you've been down in New Mexico for the past few years, so that'll be something to keep an eye on.
How would we afford it?
Well,
budget constraint.
It's got to come from somewhere.
And talk to members of the Joint Budget Committee on the way here. They think we're going to go into a recession.
Yeah, I'm not saying we do it. I'm surprised. I mean, I think a lot of you in this room would think we're way better off than New Mexico, and they're figuring out a way to do it. So, that's something to think about.
Yeah. I mean, healthcare is another strength for us right now.
Yes.
And yet I listen to members of our Joint Budget Committee, and I mean, they're just about in tears with how much they're having to cut out of our Medicaid program, for example.
Right.
I mean, we're talking long-term supports for kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities and even older people, since Medicaid pays for the nursing home care for them. I worry, and they're worried too. We have our new forecast coming out on Thursday, and last forecast showed, whether you were listening to the chief economist for the state or the governor's budget director, both said 50% chance of a recession hitting Colorado. And nationwide, I think we're at risk of that right now. Dick, you mentioned the Tabor ballot measure. It's a lot of ballot measures. It's going to be, I think. I think we've got 4 now. But what measure are you monitoring, and which ones do you think are going to impact Colorado's competitiveness, either positively or negatively?
I think, first of all, it's got to be the Tabor measure to allegedly fund education. First of all, I don't trust that, but I think that's the one, because I think that will be kind of a death knell for Tabor for the next 10 years without actually repealing Tabor. I think it's that dangerous. You mentioned Medicaid, Shaun. Colorado is now paying the price for the expansion of Medicaid several years ago. And I remember—
And both parties have done that.
I understand, but we are paying the price for that. And I would tell you, a lot of people did warn against that Colorado should not expand all that free money coming Colorado's direction from the federal government. And guess what? We are now paying the price because the free money's gone, and we're now having to live within that means. And I personally think that Medicaid is one of the most important programs we have in Colorado, because it takes care of the most vulnerable in our state, whether that be kids or the elderly. And what they're going to have to do. But even there, Shaun, the Joint Budget Committee, Senator Kirkmeyer has had to fight against the taking money out of the programs that deal with the most vulnerable, and not dealing with the real problem of Medicaid. So even there, they've mishandled it on the Joint Budget Committee. The majority on the Joint Budget Committee. But I think as we go into this fall campaign, this Tabor ballot question is going to be the fundamental issue. It's going to be the dividing line in terms of campaigns, and it will probably be a big issue in the governor's race. And frankly, I mean, the chances of a Republican winning the governorship in Colorado are slim, because we still have that Democratic tilt. And Donald Trump is still an anathema to most voters in Colorado, which taints every Republican. But that debate is going to seep into every legislative race and every statewide race coming into November.
What if that graduated income tax?
Yeah, I'm watching that one, the graduated income tax. We've seen a lot of the red states moving to eliminating income tax
Yes.
as an incentive to attract high worth individuals and families as well as businesses. Whereas the blue states have been moving, we've seen it in California now in our ballot, a graduated income tax that will focus on a higher income tax for larger net worth folks. And so I'm watching that one. Also, for a good one to watch, depending on how you view it, is there is a transportation ballot measure that has not made the ballot yet, but it's
Right.
been said it can collect signatures that would dedicate more money to surface road transportation. We were talking, the report talked about, the underfunding of our bridges and roads. Now, Miller, those folks in transit are going to get all bent out of shape on this because it is focused on saying, you can't put that money more toward non-road and bridge funding. But nonetheless, it is something that speaks to the report and putting money toward that. And then, Dick and I are, of course, we are watching the redistricting ballot measure that may get on the ballot that could change the balance of power with our congressional delegation. But that's more of a macro political issue.
Yeah, I want to hear your take on
Yeah,
that, but that
yeah,
probably
well, I'm
doesn't
all
have
for
much
it.
to do about the economy.
Yeah, can we talk about that?
Yeah, I got thoughts on that too, but
Okay.
I won't voice. But some of the things that everything can't be included in this report, but some of the things that I've thought about that just looking ahead, even this coming year, we had our driest winter on record. So another year of potentially really devastating wildfires. So that alone would impact our economy. But then you've got tourism being one of our top industries. And obviously the lack of snow hurt. Not just the ski resorts,
Right.
but you think of the people who, have plows and, and then agriculture, our other big industry, and has certainly been hurting in part because of the tariffs, in large part because of the tariffs. And now we've got the JBS strike happening too. I guess, how do you feel like the legislature is tuned in, and I don't even know what can they do to avoid this, this pending potential recession?
Well, I mean, a lot of things that are market driven are hard to legislate. But I think when you look at, climate shift and wildfires. I mean, water is a very basic part of our economy. I mean, water is a big part of what impacts the affordability of housing. And those of you in the housing industry know what it costs to get a water tap, the tap fees, and those are non-negotiable when people are doing developments. And so it is going to be it's going to be tough when you look at the report the Denver Post did on the ski industry. I mean, by 2050, Steamboat Springs will only have 50 days of skiing. I mean, that's less than 2 months. And so I don't know what we can do to legislate for that, but I do think what we can do is figure out, when we talk about workforce, if we have to begin to make shifts in our workforce to get into industries that can weather climate shift or wildfires or lack of water or other things, then we need to be able to try to be on the forefront of that in terms of training the workforce for a different type of environment.
In terms of agriculture, certainly the legislature does have some influence there. We have bills, dueling bills really, dealing with ag overtime.
Yes.
Which has, farmers say, driven migrant workers to
That's right.
other states. I think they put this in place thinking that the migrant workers would like this, would want to make the overtime, but then farmers limit the number of hours that they work, so they have to pay that overtime, and so they don't make as much money, so they're going to other states. So we've got that bill. We've got a bill dealing with extreme temperatures that is geared in part at the ag industry. So I think clearly the legislature does have some say here in
How about
terms
pesticides?
and pesticide.
I mean,
That bill died, the one dealing with the coated seeds.
But the mere fact, Shaun, that it was even brought up and debated is, 10 years ago, if you told me the Colorado State Legislature would actually debate a bill to severely restrict a farmer's ability to use pesticides on their fields, I would have said, you're crazy. That will never happen. It just shows you the out of balance. And the people who push that have no idea what it's like to farm. I mean, they were totally removed from it. And then this overtime bill. Once again, they have no idea. I mean, I see my friend Greg Walcher who is a peach farmer in Grand Junction, and how that would have impacted his peach operation, how it is impacting the peach operation in Grand Junction and Grand Mesa. Agriculture is under assault by this legislature. There's no doubt about it. They don't respect it, and then throw in this. I was going to mention something about water. Think about in fact, Kelly, wasn't it Alan Salazar who you had here? And Alan said, he's the head of the Denver Water Board, and Alan has engaged in this fight with environmentalists over the raising of the volume of that reservoir. What reservoir?
Gross reservoir.
Gross reservoir. And I thought Alan Salazar said something very significant that day. He said many of the policies that he pushed as a staffer for some Democratic elected officials were the very policies he was fighting in terms of the Denver water situation. And he's had kind of a seminal moment doing that. I thought that was that to me was as important as what I mentioned about Kent Theory earlier, about he might not have brought that company to Colorado. You see it at every turn, this overregulation, this suppression, this overtaxation, and it's got to stop or this state is going to continue to go downhill. And that's what's going to happen.
Okay, is it time for audience questions, I think? Any questions? Good.
Hi, is this on? Thank you. Tim Miller, I'm with the Colorado Farm Bureau. Thank you for talking about agriculture. Really, really appreciate that. It is under attack in this state. That coated seed bill that you mentioned was actually put forth by somebody who was not actually elected to this legislature. And my question is, we are at over a third of the legislature who has been appointed at this point, which to me seems kind of asinine. I come from Minnesota, and when somebody steps down, there's a special election and there's accountability there. But here, it seems that it's just, there's obviously there's opportunities, and we know that the legislature doesn't pay very well, but is there a way that can be fixed? Because the trend is really unnerving in terms of people stepping down and people being appointed in these policymaking positions.
Yeah, well, I think there's going to be a ballot measure on that we'll get a chance to vote on that will limit the appointments. I do want to say that a lot of the appointments, particularly at the legislature, are people just shuffling from one chamber to another. In some instances, where there's a Senate opening and somebody from this House moves in.
Dr. Michael St-Jeannet.
Yeah, and then you also see people moving into the House that are coming out of local governments. So, but I do think they're going to try to rectify that. Dick, you might know more about the details of that.
I really don't know, Mike, but it's a huge. By the way, I've been a member of Colorado Farm Bureau since I was 18 years old and growing up on the farm. But anyway, Mike and I can remember way back when an appointment to the legislature because there was a vacancy was very rare. I mean, there's a big deal because it just didn't happen. Now it's become almost routine. In fact, one guy related to me a story that he heard from somebody said, I'd like to be in the legislature, but I'm just going to wait until I can be appointed. Well, that's a heck of an attitude,
Yeah.
Those pesky voters, I don't want to have to deal with them. And so and I think that ballot question doesn't solve the problem totally, but it's better than what we got.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. But there's another succession situation too, and that is if we have a United States senator who gets elected governor, and he's intent on saying he's going to appoint a successor, and I think that's right either. I think the voters ought to have a little bit more say in this, and that one person shouldn't be able to just pick a U.S. senator for the remainder of the term. And he got appointed himself, and Mike might have a different opinion on that. But
well, I think the legislation is intended to have a special election much sooner than than the next election out. It would come within a more near-term period when that vacancy opens. So we would have more special elections if you're open to that.
Which costs money.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yes, my name's Tom Munson, and throughout the conversations today, none of the people on stage mentioned the proper role of government.
Good.
I think we should maybe get back to that, because proper role of government is to protect my liberties. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Probably the thing that had the greatest impact, positive, on the agricultural industry was the invention of the plow. John Deere invented the plow, not the government. We didn't have an agricultural department then. We relied on individuals to grow our economy. Secondly, the Great Society came into our country in 1965, pushed by LBJ. At that time, the obesity rates in our country were less than 10%, I think around 8%. Now they're over 43%. Hey, great job, medical system by the government. What would you say to these ideas?
Well, I want to recommend a really good book that came out late last year called 1929, and it lends a great perspective to the involvement of government in business, and it really also points out that we faced the similar constructs that were faced back in 1929, the big crash and what happened after that. But the Federal Reserve's involved, the political parties are at each other's throats. The debate over how much government should be involved is taking place. Obviously, it was a transition from President Hoover to President Roosevelt. President Roosevelt did get government more proactive in people's lives. But it's a great book in the sense that it shows, one, things haven't changed a whole heck of a lot. Certainly, a century later, we're a lot different in terms of technology and everything, but the same debates are going on. How much government should be involved? Government plays a lot of important roles, certainly, and Dick pointed it out, in terms of the social safety net. And when that safety net isn't working or it's inefficient, a lot of institutions pay the price. But I think it gets back to the discussion here, is finding that balance between government and the rest of our lives. And at certain times, it does get out of whack.
Colorado's government has grown substantially.
Yes, it has, dramatically. I think that goes to the heart of everything we've been talking about today, the role of government. And we just have an overactive legislature and state government that just gets involved in too much. Thank God. Oh, thank you. Thank God, Shaun, and you would agree with this, legislature can only meet for 120 days.
Yes.
And
I've got another reason for wanting that. But
that's true. And this notion, there are a lot of people who want to go to a full-time legislature. Boy, would that be a disaster. And so I think we still need to maintain this. By the way, the original proposal to limit the legislature was 90 days. Mm-hmm. I think we ought to do Texas 60 days. Frankly, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that if there was one ballot measure I'd love to see, a constitutional ballot measure, would limit the number of bills they can pass every year.
Yeah.
There you go.
There's over 500 bills I mean, there's like 700 to go through, but we should limit it. I've said this to 100 bills a year. And so they really focus on the most important things that, well, it tried to focus on the most important things. And we had a question about what would you tell the next governor. I'm supporting Michael Bennet for governor, and I have said to him, I think that he ought to use his veto authority a lot more and be very clear that he only wants a certain number of bills to come to his desk. And then after that number, he's done.
Well, here we are mid-March, and they're still bringing bills.
I know. And they'll be bringing them to the end of session because they get through those loopholes.
Question?
Jeanette Newville, retired Chevron. At the end of January, we had an extreme cold spell where we had close to 0 temperatures. A report was done on the energy use during that period, and our electricity was supplied 87% by coal and natural gas. Would both of the panelists please comment on that?
It drives home the point that as we're killing coal much sooner than we should, and because it's going to go away, we all know that. But I think it's been an artificial murder of coal that shouldn't have happened this quickly. And then the drive to even eliminate natural gas. That's why I think we're in for some dark times in the future, and we're going to pay for this.
Well, I mean, and that was the only time I think we had winter this year, right? I mean, the way it's been. But I do think natural gas. I definitely want to see that continue to be a part of our mix. But I do think a lot of people. One of our more prominent Republicans, Phil Anschutz, has invested a lot in wind energy, and I know has been concerned about the shift in that. And I do think that residential solar is an important part, particularly with batteries coming online that are becoming much cheaper for homes to be able to power their homes, be able to power their appliances and stuff during shutdowns from the grid that we're seeing, particularly with wind and stuff. And that Excel has been doing, particularly in Boulder. Shaun, I don't know have you lost your energy in Boulder?
Yeah,
you have. So I still think we're going to need and I do think I don't think that fossil fuels will ever be completely eliminated from the energy mix. I mean, I don't think the public is going to allow that to happen, and I don't think industry is going to allow that to happen.
Question up front?
You can just shout it.
I'm happy to.
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So Max Markham, NIOP's Public Policy Director, we're a commercial real estate advocacy group. What we've seen, at least in the business environment, is there seems to be this bifurcation of the Democratic caucus, which in order to be pro-consumer, you have to be anti-business. I think that's becoming a huge issue. At what point do you think the legislature figures out how to do both at the same time? Because we see the regulation and the increase in property taxes. We've got Energize Denver and Reg 28 that are, persistently causing property owners to have to comply with these aggressive energy regulations in the pursuit of this utopian perspective of constant green energy. And I believe the consumer wants that, but I think we're having a really big struggle in the state legislature that in order to be pro or anti-business, in order to be pro.
I was raised by a Republican father and a Democratic mother, and I'd like to think that I find a balance on the political world, but there's a struggle in the Democratic Party. Much like the Republicans have had over time, the Democrats, between the uber progressives and the moderates, and it's playing out in front of our eyes. And
it's bleeding into legislation.
Yeah, and it bleeds into legislation. I think Paul Pazin's here, our former police chief of Denver, a great guy. I've known his mother forever, and he's running in South. He's going to run for Denver City Council in Southwest Denver, and Denver City Council has struggled itself with a balance between your more moderate Democrats and your more extreme progressives, and so I say all that in that policy will get caught up in all that, and it's going to depend on if the moderate Democrats prevail. And I'm not so sure they're going to everywhere. I live in a very, and Miller grew up in represented the part of the area I grew up in. It's become very progressive. You have younger people that want to see these green policies. And I'm not always so sure they think through the policies because they have jobs. And I'm not sure they think, well, God, if I pass this, how does this affect my job? Or how does this affect the price of my home? And so, and that's where in groups like this come into play and the business comes into play. They have to connect the dots for people to say, if this policy passes, this is where you're going to pay a lot more and this is going to affect your life.
So what you're seeing with the division in the Democratic Party is you're seeing groups that typically would have helped fund Republican lawmakers, campaigns, seeing this is a one-party state. I'm going to find those business-friendly Democrats, and they're funding them. And it is creating a huge division in the legislature.
Did you see what happened to Diana DeGette this past weekend? Diana DeGette, who has not exactly been a conservative firebrand in Congress, she only got 32% of a straw poll taken at the Denver Democratic Assembly. She was defeated by a 28-year-old Democratic socialist. Now, Diana DeGette will go on to win the primary. But think about that. Within the hardest core activists of the Democratic Party, she could only get this. She's been in public office since 1996, back before Mike and I were born. And and she could only get 32%. So that tells you exactly what you're saying right there.
And then you've got Democrats that are petitioning onto the ballot too, like Shannon Burt.
That's
For example, more pro-business Democrat.
I want to thank Mike and Shaun and Dick so much. Can we please give them a round of applause?
Thanks, Shaun.
I just wanted to close this out briefly. If there are any other questions, I think our panelists can hang out another minute or two. I just wanted to say, if you had fun today, please consider joining us at some of our future events. We will have a legislative recap on May 5th. That's pretty close to when the legislature will be ending, but we also would love for you to join us this summer and this fall. We have a variety of programming. Please note, August 11th, don't come at 7:30 in the morning. That's more of our happy hours series where we gather closer to 4:30 or 6 p.m. But in closing, I wanted to say none of this is possible without the support of you all and other donors. Common Sense Institute is a nonprofit organization. Your support is tax deductible, and we really rely on the generosity of individuals like you to support the research that we're doing, to support our fellowships. We want to continue to be studying the issues that matter most to the Colorado economy. There was a lot of talk today about the ballot. We are teeing up what we think is our largest ballot guide ever. So we would really appreciate your support so that we can conduct a ballot guide that's objective as possible and can be as far-reaching as possible so that Coloradans have the data and facts that they need to make good decisions. We're never going to tell people how to vote. We just provide the tools to be one of, I'm sure, many resources that they are looking at when they are determining their vote in the ballot. I also wanted to say support sometimes can just look like a trade association supporting us as a member. I know there's a lot of trade associations in the room today. You might be a member of a trade association. If you're not a member of Common Sense Institute, please talk to me afterwards, or you can go on our website. There's a variety of ways that being a member really pays off for Common Sense Institute. We'll make sure that you're getting exclusive briefings for your board. You can help us think about what research projects would be most important to Coloradans. So please consider supporting us as a member. And then finally, there's other ways to be involved as well. You can start listening to our brand new podcast. It's called Common Sense Unfiltered. That is available on any podcast platform, Apple platform. We'd really love to have you a part of that. And if you're sitting here saying, hey, I'm not sure if I can support you financially, you can support us by inviting us to speak to your board of directors, any organization you're a part of, civic group, men group, a women's group. There's so many different ways that people are getting together this day and age, and we would love to have an opportunity to have our fellows or myself or one of our economists come brief you. So with that, thank you so much for being here today. Consider supporting Common Sense, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.